So before I read my paper, I just wanted to thank the organizers of the conference for giving me an opportunity to present this work here, which came out of an assignment for Professor Shireen Razik's Race and Knowledge Production seminar here at UCLA. I've been a medical student at UCLA for the past couple of years, and I'm enrolled in a dual degree program that's given me the chance to put my medical training on hold and to start my PhD in the Department of Anthropology. I'm working on a project right now about a medication called Truvada that since 2012 has been prescribed as pre-exposure prophylaxis for HIV, also called PrEP. It's a medication that I take every day, and I mention this because my paper opens with an autoethnographic anecdote in which my positioning as a medical student interested in entering the field of sexual health collides with my critically rooted training in anthropology and gender studies, animating a friction concealed beneath the surface of a clinician-patient interaction between a healthcare provider and myself, a gay man seeking a 3-month refill on my Truvada prescription. Have you talked to your provider before about setting a goal for condom use? The nurse smiles encouragingly in my direction with a well-meaning enthusiasm, and I recognize the trappings of motivational interviewing from some training in the method in medical school. At the moment, though, my main motivation is to say whatever necessary to get out of the room, down to the lab for my blood draw, and out the door to class. The answer to her question is no. Well, not exactly. My goal in taking Truvada has been less about the crude calculus of condoms and more about my relationship to the sex that may or may not have involved them. I'm a medical student, so I stammer in hopes of heading off the speech I sense bubbling up, the admonitions that PrEP only protects against HIV and not, so you sound pretty good. Would you say 80%? I nod, feeling uneasy at the idea of driving my education as a wedge between myself and the presumed degeneracy marking gay male bodies in the biomedical imaginary. I'll put in 3 refills. She hands me a paper bag, bleached clinically white, and tells me it's filled with goodies. I'll open it at home and find cheap condoms, lube and condiment-sized packages, and a purple plastic beaded necklace. Did I convince her? Does she think I'm a goodie? At least 80% of one? In the 1990s, at the height of the period now reflected on as the AIDS crisis, the clarion call for condom use emerged as a rallying cry for gay men. Condoms became common sense, and were even elevated to hegemonic status as, quote, the singular marker of moral sexual citizenship, end quote. In the process, a consciousness was constructed through the infolding of shame arbitrated by the ascendancy of this one notion of safer sex. Although the landscape of prevention has been inexorably altered by the recent introduction of a biopharmaceutical chemoprophylactic technology that reduces to the point of functional elimination the risk of HIV transmission with its prescribed use, fear of HIV circulating since the pre-PrEP era has shaped contemporary gay male behavior, and by extension, the construction of identity. The project of unsticking shame from the bodies who desire unmediated intimacy, just as the process that stuck it to or in them, is both social and scientific. A rigorous systematic review and meta-analysis published last year in the official journal of the International AIDS Society stated clearly, quote, PrEP is protective against HIV infection across populations and presents few significant safety risks, end quote. Owing to an atypically generous copay assistance program, by which Truvada's manufacturer offers a total annual benefit of $3,600, the drug is also inexpensive, even $0 out of pocket, with most health insurance plans. Truvada is effective, it is safe, and it is affordable. So what then could account for its lukewarm reception as a key tool in the arsenal combating the ongoing HIV epidemic? In this paper, I turn to the public health and clinical scientific literatures to answer this question by tracking the emergence and subsequent rearticulation of a particular anxiety related to PrEP's widespread implementation, the concept of risk compensation. Risk compensation names the phenomenon by which, quote, reduced perceptions of risk after the introduction of a preventative intervention lead to more frequent risk-taking behavior, end quote, and thus usher in harms that eclipse the originally intended benefit. This concern has proven particularly potent, animating opposition to PrEP, running the gamut from measured skepticism to outright hostility among public health and medical professionals, as well as notably and publicly in the leadership of the Los Angeles-based nonprofit AIDS Healthcare Foundation, or AHF, which is the largest AIDS service organization in the world. Michael Weinstein, AHF's president, infamously articulated a position at the dawn of PrEP that reflects and has been productive of such reticence stifling the medication's potential. Quote, the use of PrEP carries significant risk that the people who take it haphazardly will mistakenly believe that they are completely protected from HIV and other STDs. These individuals will engage in unprotected sex, which will ultimately lead to an increase in HIV and other infections. end quote. This concern is echoed in the scientific literature on PrEP, reinscribed in the tone of paper titles like, quote, pre-exposure prophylaxis, losing condoms, pre-exposure prophylaxis promotion may undermine safe sex, end quote. Certain researchers in the field are beginning to write back against this troublingly pervasive line of reasoning, putting forth the argument that, quote, clinical trial results have collectively revealed minimal risk compensation among participants, with some trials even reporting increased condom use on average, end quote. A state-of-the-field systematic review accepted for publication just months prior to writing this paper showed the same result. Quote, we did not find any conclusive evidence that PrEP users increase sexual risk behaviors, end quote. Pitting data against data, these studies seek to undermine the scientific validity of risk compensation claims. Although valiant and necessary, such efforts are plagued, I would argue, by a fundamental misapprehension that diminishes their transformative potential. Demonstrating that misgivings rooted in the specter of risk compensation are statistically unjustified, i.e. not supported by the available quantitative data, fails to comprehend and root out the underlying psychically resonant forces that shape these knowledge claims and imbue them with life. Scientific research is a practice deeply inflected by the social at all phases, in the design of trials, the often multiple and sometimes divergent interpretations of resulting data, and the declarative statements deduced therefrom. By casting a critical gaze on the concept of risk compensation, I argue that a racist fantasy of control haunts the discourse on PrEP in a way that substantially undermines the capacity of chemoprophylaxis as a tool for HIV prevention to stem transmission, and furthermore, to catalyze a progressive shift in the constellation of meanings associated with HIV, safety, risk, and the concept of sexual health overall. When the erroneous belief that PrEP users will engage in risk compensation behaviors and thereby increase personal and community level risk serves as a justification for curtailing prescription and use of this revolutionary medication, the health and well-being of precisely those that PrEP's critics purport to protect is paradoxically imperiled. Put another way, the ascription here of abstract risk generates very material risk, resulting in further stigmatization of MSM and clearing space for the persistence of health disparities that fall along axes of sexual and racial difference. Beyond making transparent the social processes and power relations at work behind the definition of acceptable risk vis-a-vis the discourse on risk compensation, it's necessary to go further and ask, what exactly constitutes risk? Who is constructed as vulnerable, and why? Quote, life in the so-called West is full of risk, end quote, explains Christina Hanhart in her book that explores how LGBT demands for safe space were shaped in relation to broader public safety initiatives, all to pernicious effect along race and class lines. The proliferation of risk is an outcome of a society increasingly entranced by concern with futurity and safety, an effect exacerbated by the elaboration of scientific knowledge. In this context, quote, individuals are asked to manage their own risks while relying on the rule of the expert to determine what is a threat, end quote. With regard to HIV, the politics of risks are co-constructed with an imperative of health, quote, that finds its roots in a moral discourse of responsibility over self, end quote. I would extend Hanhart's argument by adding that responsibility over self must, in the context of risk compensation debate regarding PrEP, be understood not merely as a moral discourse, but as a racial discourse as well. Stuart Hall describes the Enlightenment subject as being, quote, based on a conception of the human person as a fully centered, unified individual endowed with the capacities of reason, consciousness, and action, end quote. Toni Morrison's Playing in the Dark helps to racialize this picture by elucidating how literature, as a form of knowledge production, reveals, quote, the fabrication of an Africanist persona, end quote, to be a reflexive exercise used in designing the, quote, architecture of the new white man, end quote, in ways that suture whiteness to the conception of the Enlightenment subject. This psychological process of self-making is neither accidental nor automatic. Rather, it is the product of immense and continued efforts. I would like to contend that Morrison's insight offers a productive entry point to better understand the fixation on risk compensation, and what it tells us about the kind of subject that the forces in the anti-PrEP contingent are invested in imagining and producing. Who is the new gay male subject? How does he behave? What desires does he contain? To what extent has he conquered them? How tenuous is that putative victory? And on whom must he subserviently depend to define and defend his best interests via the discourse of risk? The War Against Prevention, an incendiary paid advertorial written by AHF's Michael Weinstein and circulated in gay men's magazines in June 2015, provides rich terrain for devising an answer to these questions. It begins, quote, "One of the greatest legacies of the AIDS movement has been the successful promotion of safer sex. While behavior modification is never 100% effective, HIV prevention in the United States and abroad has been a remarkable success story with certain groups such as gay men and IV drug users," end quote. Beginning an anti-PrEP diatribe with the invocation and celebration of safer sex installs a nonsensical incompatibility between this hard-won victory of the AIDS movement and chemoprophylaxis such as PrEP. Foreclosing linguistically the possibility for PrEP to be imagined as part of the repertoire of safer sex is counterproductive to the goal of promoting sexual health, not supported by research, and as at least one PrEP expert has argued, professionally unethical. Quote, "Public health ethics call for interventions to reduce morbidity or mortality, to be based on empirical science, and to appropriately balance burdens and benefits. As an HIV prevention intervention, PrEP achieves these ethical standards. Withholding PrEP on the grounds of actual or anticipated risk compensation prioritizes personal values that threaten public health ethics," end quote. Where this critique needs to be extended, however, is that the individual focus on the privilege given to personal values over supposedly trustworthy, empirically generated scientific knowledge places too great an emphasis on conscious decision-making and cognitively mediated value formation, failing in this regard to capture the psychoanalytic aspects of subject formation undergirding these judgments. Specifically, the drive to control and tame the unruly, savage impulses of the inherently pathological gay man. Given an excuse, like PrEP, to feel any sense of liberation from the compulsory obedience to a regime of respectability instilled by fear of HIV, his true nature is free to emerge, to the detriment of his own health and that of all others in his community. Allowing this to occur threatens the toehold on civility a certain homonormative gay subject, the Morrison-esque new gay man, has only recently been granted. The expert discourse of risk compensation operates as an ideological tool designed to beat back the phantasmic savage inside us and among us. If gay men cannot be brought fully into the charmed circle, if they cannot become fully civilized, at least behavioral enforcement of condom use as a bodily practice might make them more respectable, worthy of humanity, and by extension, life. Reading Weinstein's words through this lens exposes that he and his allies in the crusade against PrEP are motivated to install themselves as the final arbiters of risk, progress, and post-AIDS movement gay male identity. The specter of condomless sex without fear is antithetical to the achievement of their vision. Quote, "In the debate surrounding PrEP," Weinstein continues, "emotional appeals for sexual liberation have trumped medical science. I would dispute this claim, arguing instead that it would be much more accurate to characterize PrEP opponents like Weinstein as those dominated by an emotional, even libidinal, investment in sexual repression so thoroughly embedded as to negate the conclusions drawn from medical science. What is truly at risk due to the emergence of PrEP is something meaningfully distinct from HIV infection rates. What PrEP really threatens to unsettle is the tenuously propped up image of the responsible gay man who always practices safe sex." Weinstein writes, quote, "While we cannot tell consenting adults that they must use condoms, we can tell them the truth," end quote. The truth Weinstein peddles, when analyzed, amounts to this. Powerful, privileged, white gay men who have achieved a delicate stake in respectability since the pre-treatment AIDS era require that all gay men comport themselves in the prescribed fashion, despite the fact that this demand flies in the face of scientifically backed best practice and thereby exposes anyone who cannot or will not accede to this civilizing mission to real risk that could, with one daily pill, be functionally eliminated. As has been argued elsewhere, and hopefully illustrated clearly through the examples offered in this paper, quote, "Via the expert technologies of PrEP, the long history of medicalizing homosexuality has embarked upon a new, significant phase," end quote. What has escaped necessary examination in this dawning era, however, are the psychic underpinnings of the discourse on risk compensation that dictate the shape this phase will take, the extent to which it will or will not foster a productive refashioning of the meanings linking HIV, safety, and risk, and the degree to which health, physical and mental, of MSM will be improved or fall short of its promise as a result. By bringing insight derived from critical race theory into this pressing conversation, I have endeavored to demonstrate that analyzing the place of risk compensation in the debate on PrEP is best approached not as an epidemiological project, but as a psychoanalytic one. In the pre-PrEP era, the expert discourses of public health and medicine framed condomless sex as almost a Freudian slip, the unwilled unearthing of an untamed unconscious. Aided by antiretroviral therapy as treatment, and now PrEP, gay men are embarking on the messy process of disentangling pleasure and desire from fear. Why then does the project of caring and health caring for gay men still traffic so troublingly in the moral language of good and bad, in the intensifying quest to define and enforce in racial terms an acceptable version of gay male subjectivity? What would an approach to HIV prevention that truly depathologized desire look like? How can gay men collaborate with, yet wrest control of our bodies and selves away from an expert discourse that continually aspires to scare us straight? Thank you.